Picture the boards rattling from a thunderous check, a sold-out arena roaring to life, and a single, unyielding figure at the heart of the chaos. That was Dan Maloney, an NHL enforcer whose skill and fury combined to make him one of the most feared and respected players of his time. Where other tough guys simply dropped the gloves, Maloney could also fire a wrister top shelf or set up a critical goal, turning him into a legend of old-school hockey. Tonight, we peel back the layers on Snowshoes Maloney, stepping into the rinks where he became both hero and villain. If you've ever craved that raw, gritty energy of a bygone era of hockey, buckle up. His story delivers the hits, the goals, and the haunting echoes that still ripple through NHL lore today. Imagine, for a moment, the roar of a hockey arena in the early 1970s, a low hum of anticipation swelling into a deafening roar as players skate onto the ice. The air so cold you can feel it crystallizing in your lungs. The stands are filled with fans clutching paper cups of hot chocolate and programs rolled tight. The lights above glare down onto the glossy rink, a white canvas where artistry, brute force, and raw emotion are about to unfold. If you were part of that scene, a loyal Chicago Blackhawks supporter, say, you might have just glimpsed the first steps of a rookie named Dan Maloney. Maybe you'd sense something quietly electric about him before he even hit his first shift. Perhaps you'd notice the set of his jaw or the calm, measured way he surveyed the ice. He was only 20 then, but there was an unspoken authority in his stance. Born on September 24, 1950, in Barrie, Ontario, Daniel Charles Snowshoes Maloney was the kind of kid who grew up with hockey woven into his identity. This was Canada, after all, where winter meant frozen ponds and dog-eared hockey cards stuffed in jacket pockets. He stood tall, just over 6 feet, and possessed a natural athleticism that belied his size. While other kids were busy dreaming, Dan was practicing. He'd watch older boys skate, watch their stride, dissect their technique, and learn to replicate it. And sure enough, his discipline and intensity paid off when the Chicago Blackhawks made him the 14th overall pick in the 1970 NHL entry draft. That was the beginning of an 11-season NHL journey that would see him lauded, feared, prosecuted, admired, and ultimately remembered as one of the toughest men ever to lace up a pair of skates. So, how does a fresh-faced draftee from Ontario carve out a name in an era already dominated by bruisers and marquee stars? You could say he did it by combining pure grit with surprising finesse. Because for all his fearsome hitting and willingness to fight, Maloney wasn't just a hammer, he had hands. He could score key goals, set up his line mates, and contribute to a team's offense rather than simply shadowing an opponent's top winger. Yet it was that grittier side, those epic showdowns against the league's bruisers, that made fans either cheer in elation or watch in hushed awe. Step forward to 1971. It's the Stanley Cup Finals. Maloney's Chicago Blackhawks are battling it out for the most coveted trophy in hockey. Though he's more of a role player at this young stage, he's quickly learning what it takes to survive in the crucible of playoff hockey. Those lessons would follow him in every locker room, in every shift, as he grew from a promising rookie into a genuinely intimidating presence. Teammates at the time described him as someone who took mental notes on every game, every opponent. That intelligence set him apart from the archetypal goon label. He knew how to play smart, exploit an opponent's weaknesses, and most importantly, harness his temper so it served the team rather than sinking it. In 1973, Maloney was traded to the Los Angeles Kings. It was a pivotal moment. The Kings were building, looking to mix grit with the blossoming skill of players like Marcel Dionne. Maloney slotted in as a player who could both protect star talent and chip in offensively. Over the next 2 seasons, he'd notched 27 goals in back-to-back campaigns, an impressive feat that shouted to the league, "This guy's not just for fisticuffs, he's got skill." Indeed, he was forging a reputation as one of the better power forwards in the game, a man who could mash you into the boards 1 minute and sneak in a wrist shot to the top corner the next. Los Angeles fans still recall nights when Maloney patrolled the wing and made other teams think twice about running the Kings' top line. But it was in Detroit, starting in 1975, that Dan Maloney's name turned legendary. The Red Wings needed a spark, and they got it in a big, punishing package. He racked up 203 penalty minutes that first season in Detroit, a monstrous number, even in an era known for bench-clearing brawls. That was 1970s hockey, a brand of play that glorified raw physical intimidation. If you were a Red Wings fan, you loved him. If you were cheering for the opposition, you dreaded him. The Joe Louis Arena faithful would erupt at the sight of Maloney stepping on the ice. Opponents had to be wary. Was he about to flatten someone with a thunderous check, or set up a breakout pass to start a scoring chance? He brought that intangible quality coaches crave, a player who could single-handedly tilt the emotional balance of a game. Opponents hated facing him. Teammates swore by him. Amid these highlights, though, came one of the darkest moments of his career. The Brian Glennie incident on November 5, 1975. Picture a raucous crowd in Maple Leaf Gardens, tensions already high between Detroit and Toronto. Maloney attacks Glennie from behind, raining down punches until Glennie's face hits the ice. Glennie, concussed, is rushed to the hospital. Maloney is slapped with assault charges, the third NHL player to face criminal prosecution for on-ice violence. For weeks, the sports world erupts in debate. Have we gone too far? Should the law intrude on the rough-and-tumble domain of hockey? Eventually, Maloney is acquitted, but the conversation about safety and violence lingers, overshadowing the simpler narrative of an enforcer's role. Maloney, for his part, told reporters he wouldn't change his style, an old-school stance that, if anything, crystallized his place as a symbol of that ferocious brand of hockey. By 1978, Maloney found himself in the white and blue jersey of the Toronto Maple Leafs, one of the league's original franchises with a storied past and a fiercely loyal fan base. As if the drama from the Glennie incident hadn't been enough, now he was suiting up for the team whose player he had so brutally attacked. Yet it only took a few big hits, maybe a strategically timed fight, for Leafs fans to warm up to him. Before long, they were chanting his name whenever the opposition's enforcers started prowling. In Toronto, he'd spend 5 seasons, at times playing alongside big names like Darryl Sittler and Lanny McDonald, providing muscle and an offensive bump. Rumor has it that even in that star-studded locker room, Maloney commanded respect. Some said he had a quiet leadership style, preferring to let his play, and the occasional friendly scuffle, do the talking. Others recall he was never shy to read a teammate the riot act if he felt they were coasting. That dichotomy, tough as nails but supremely loyal, endeared him to fans and teammates alike. Throughout his journey, Maloney lived with the reality that the NHL was changing. Finesse was rising in importance. The league was starting to question the role of fighting. New expansions, new rules, and new waves of Europeans and American college players were reshaping hockey's culture. But in the late 70s and early 80s, Maloney remained relevant because he was one of those rare enforcers who could actually put the puck in the net. He had consecutive 20-plus goal seasons, a mark of versatility that placed him in an elite class of power forwards. The next generation of fans might find it odd to think an enforcer could be a team's third leading scorer, but that was precisely Maloney's niche. He finally hung up his skates in 1982, having logged 737 NHL games, 192 goals, and 259 assists. And let's not forget those near 1,500 penalty minutes, each one a testament to a philosophy that intimidation and protection were as integral to the game as speed and scoring. Retirement, however, did not mean stepping away from hockey. Right away, he entered the coaching world, becoming an assistant with the Maple Leafs. In 1984, he became their head coach, a transition that placed him under a whole different spotlight. From the bench, Maloney demanded the same intensity he once embodied on the ice. Toronto's roster, at the time, was in flux, with front office moves and trades that sometimes perplexed fans. Maloney struggled to translate his own brand of old-school aggression into a system that worked. While players recalled him as disciplined and meticulous, the Leafs didn't rack up the wins needed for a deep playoff run. He soon found himself moving on to the Winnipeg Jets, another team in rebuild mode, hoping his leadership could spark a turnaround. The results remained mixed, culminating in a mid-season firing. The intangible fire he brought as a player didn't always equate to success behind the bench. Between stints as head coach, Maloney served as an assistant for the New York Rangers, but the writing seemed on the wall. He was an old guard in a league that was evolving fast, with innovative coaching methods and a diminishing appetite for the physical style Maloney had championed. By the mid-90s, his coaching career wound down, and Dan Maloney receded from the day-to-day swirl of professional hockey. He still popped up at alumni events, charitable games, and local rinks, always recognized by fans who revered that old, gritty era. But behind the smiles and autographs lurked personal challenges. Many of Maloney's contemporaries struggled with the physical and psychological after-effects of constant fighting and collisions. Head trauma wasn't exactly a hot topic in the 1970s, so players rarely considered the long-term consequences of repeated blows to the head. Over time, Maloney wrestled with anxiety, depression, and issues linked to alcohol. His wife, Suzanne, at one point voiced concern about how the culture of hockey, where nights out with the boys and a general tough-it-out mentality, had seeped into their personal life. For a man who once wore the label enforcer as a badge of honor, publicly grappling with vulnerability was never going to be easy. The hush around his mental health struggles underscored a generation that handled pain quietly, behind closed doors. In the final chapters of his life, Maloney returned to his roots in Ontario, living in relative peace, occasionally venturing to smaller hockey gatherings or connecting with old teammates. Then came November 19th, 2018. Word spread that Dan Maloney had passed away at 68. There wasn't a major lead-up, no sensational news blasts about his declining health. Instead, fans woke up to headlines of his death and the tributes that followed from the Maple Leafs, Red Wings, and a host of ex-players who recalled him as not just a formidable on-ice presence, but also a man of unwavering loyalty off the rink. The outpouring was warm, yet tinged with regret. Regret that many never fully appreciated his nuance as a player, regret that he might have endured more pain than he ever let on, regret that hockey's old guard so rarely got the closure or health support they deserved. After his passing, some circles revisited the philosophical debates about the 1970s brand of hockey. Did it create folk heroes at the cost of players' well-being? Did the fractious environment of that time set the stage for moral quandaries about violence and mental health? Maloney's case offered no simple answers, but it rekindled the conversation. Meanwhile, the fans who admired him for his fearlessness carried his memory forward, retelling stories of him flooring an opponent with one well-timed punch, then a period later jumping in on an odd man rush to bury a goal. He was the quintessential power forward before the label even became standard. In hockey lore, greatness often hinges on championships and record-breaking stats. Dan Maloney, lacking a Stanley Cup ring and never inducted into the Hall of Fame, might get overlooked by those who equate legacy with silverware. But for those who relish the intangible side of the sport, unspoken codes, unwavering camaraderie, and the ferocious battles that defined an entire generation, he's lodged in the pantheon of giants. He was a living demonstration that you could be both a punishing enforcer and a capable scorer, that you could switch seamlessly from a bare-knuckle exchange to a set-up pass, and that there was a distinct honor in protecting your own. His personal life, from the fatherly role he played at home to the quiet struggles he faced, reminds us that behind every larger-than-life legend is a real human grappling with complexities. He leaves behind children, grandchildren, and a web of memories that shape how we view not just him, but the entire culture of old-time hockey. For every fan who treasures the "when hockey was rough and real" argument, Dan Maloney's name is an immediate staple. For every critic of violence in the sport, it's a case study in the potential dangers of letting players bare-knuckle their way through seasons without deeper reflection or medical safeguards. In the big picture, Maloney's significance transcends the goals and fights that peppered his stat line. He personified an era when grit often eclipsed finesse, when linesmen waited a bit longer to break up fights, and when an opposing forward thought twice about driving the net if Maloney was on patrol. While the game has evolved, speed and skill dominating today's NHL, there's a continued appetite for stories that echo the primal intensity of yesteryear. That's why, even now, vintage footage of Maloney's fights or hits can gather tens of thousands of views online, inciting debates about whether today's players could handle men like Dan Maloney. It's a testament to how he remains embedded in hockey's collective consciousness. Ultimately, Dan Maloney's tale weaves through the rosters of iconic franchises, Chicago, LA, Detroit, Toronto, and ties them to a broader narrative about a player who refused to be defined by a single role. He was a punch-throwing gatekeeper and a legitimate offensive force. He was a father and a husband who found solace and identity in the game he served so loyally, even as it claimed pieces of his body and, possibly, his mind. He was a coach who tried, albeit with limited success, to pass on the values of tenacity and courage to teams struggling to find their direction. And perhaps there's an underdog quality to his story as well. Dan Maloney never seized the trophy that so many players chase, never got the Hall of Fame nod. Instead, he etched his mark in the hearts of fans who watched him defend his teammates as though they were family. He etched it in the battered boards of arenas where he delivered checks that left spectators breathless. He etched it in the record books with a fusion of goals, assists, and penalty minutes that reflect a career spent spanning the line between skill and savage physicality. Maybe it's that gritty duality that resonates most. He died quietly, but his legacy remains an exclamation point. Images of him tangling with Dave Schultz or shaking the boards with a devastating hit on a rushing winger remain fused in fans' memories. And maybe that's how he'd want it, to be remembered as someone who never backed down, who gave every bit of himself to the game, and who carried the scars of a warrior well beyond the final buzzer. Whether you admire or criticize the brute force era he stood for, you can't deny that Dan Maloney left an indelible mark on hockey history, one forged in blood, sweat, and an unwavering love for the game. If anything, let his story spark your curiosity. Was the old-time hockey style more genuine, more intense, or just plain reckless? Does Dan Maloney symbolize an era that needs to stay in the past, or one we should preserve in memory as the tough, unfiltered essence of the sport's roots? If you've ever watched a modern NHL tilt and missed that raw edge, maybe you're missing the ghost of Dan Maloney, gliding in, fists clenched, doing what he believed had to be done. At the end of the day, he was a man of principle: protect your team, play with heart, never shirk a challenge. And those who watched him live it out will never forget the sight.